Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Sporting Shadows, the podcast where we cover fringe sports, sports in the shadow of other mainstream sports that get more coverage. Today I'm joined by Isaac McIlwrath.
Hello.
Northern Irish archer, and he's going to be telling me all things about archery. He's brought his bow with him, just behind, quite imposing.
Yeah, just decorate the set for episode 1, you know.
Absolutely enormous. But Isaac, how are you doing?
Doing well, yes. I've just come back from Northern Irish Indoor Nationals, feeling pretty good. We've got GB and Irish Nationals coming up very soon at this point in time, so things are very gung-ho at the minute, getting ready for those. Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to hear all about your career and your journey in archery. So what sort of got you into archery? What sparked that initial desire to get in?
I thought about this before. It's like really hard to initially think about where in my brain I just suddenly loved the idea of flinging sticks with slightly bigger sticks. When I was like 6, I had a book called like The Dangerous Book for Boys. There were loads of different things you could do, and one of them was making a bow and arrow in your back garden, and I just absolutely loved it. I found some sticks, my dad got me some string, and it worked, and I just absolutely loved it. And from then, I always wanted to find a way of actually doing it properly. And then by the time I got into high school, I found a friend who did archery as well. I just begged them like every day. I was like, take me with you. Yes, take me. And I really, really wanted to just get going. But then, they took me along eventually one day, and I went through a beginner's course, and I haven't really stopped since.
What sort of age was this?
I was about second year or third year of high school, so I was around 14 years old. When I first kicked off, and I didn't go immediately into the typical archery that you get to see in the Olympics. I went into something known as indoor field archery, which is a bit different. It's under a whole different organisation called IFAA, and I learned a different style of archery altogether, but it did build my initial foundations for the sport.
And what was the sort of moment early on that you realised archery can be a bit more than a hobby to you?
I've got to say it was my first time I did a big competition, which was the European Indoor Archery Champs back in 2020, right before the world shut down. I did really well at that. I was quite happy with myself. I took home a European silver for barebow, which I was quite happy with. It was only in the junior category, but from that point I was like, right, this is my sport. I found it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and that was a while ago now, wasn't it? 4 years.
Yeah, even then, when I started, it was 2 years in, so I'm about 6 or 7 years into the sport by about now. Yeah.
And would you say archery is very much a maturing sport?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's had a lot of recent growth, and I'd say there's a lot of stuff that's still happening and growing. Like every single day, there's more and more people discovering it, and I think social media is playing a really big part in more people discovering archery. Like, there's a lot less of people getting into it because of fictional characters like Brave or Katniss or Hawkeye, but more just finding people online who are just shooting a bow completely normally as you would in typical target shooting, and seeing those kinds of videos getting really, really popular. It's bringing a lot of people to the sport. Yeah,
it's sort of. Would you say it's romanticised online or in fictionalised? What influence does that have on the archery community? Is it sometimes over-dramatised like we see in film and TV series?
Well, there's definitely loads of examples of people online like explaining the techniques that people are doing in film and TV, which are people say sometimes are wrong, but it's more they're different techniques to what you would do for target shooting, because that optimizes being accurate. But whenever you're looking back at like historical techniques, you're more trying to just be quick. And that's what a lot of the more hunty or like Hawkeye style of archers are trying to do. But at the same time, it is mostly wrong because they're probably not shooting real arrows, because that's a whole health and safety thing. Yeah. So you do see a lot of inaccuracies in media, but that doesn't really translate at all to whenever people get into it from that. So anytime that there's a fictional archer that's really, really big, I personally get quite excited because it means that more people are going to get into the sport.
So we're not likely to see someone like Legolas shooting 3 arrows at once.
Well, yeah, not in competition. I don't think they'll be able to get away with that. But it's very fun seeing the very different sides of archery that you can get, and you can do a lot of just fun things without having to be doing competitions. And it is quite cool to see what people can pull off.
Are the sort of mainstream set of archery competitions more focused on technical? Are there any creative aspects or not?
There's not a lot of room, especially in recurve. There's the occasional differences in technique, but they are really, really minor. There's things like whether you draw the bow straight to you or if you come out slightly and come in, like angular versus linear draw, and things that are like really technical. But in general, you're all taught a very similar technique. And there's minor variations in that you can mold the technique to your body itself and just how your body acts. So I've had to change my technique recently because I discovered there's some weird things with my elbow and stuff like that. But most people, at least for recurve archery, would be doing very similar techniques. And but there's also different formats of competition, which allows a lot more creativity in how you shoot.
Would you like to see more creative types? I mean, I'm not quite saying adopt a sort of golf style where you have golf and then crazy golf or adventure golf. But I especially saw a lot of calls during the Olympics for horseback archery and things like that. Some stuff that historically that Mongolia are known for. Do you think horseback archery would be something quite special to include?
Yeah, horseback archery would be quite interesting, but there's actually a very new format that's just come out which would help a lot of people get into it, because archery is already a generally expensive to get into. So to be able to own a bow and a horse, it becomes a very exclusive sport. But very recently, there's actually a new format called run archery that's just kicked off. The first European competition of it just happened in the UK, and the idea of it is you run a course, and at certain stages along the course you have to be able to knock over targets with a bow and arrow and continue to run, and it's a combination of who can run the course fastest and having knocked over all the targets.
So they're taking a sort of modern pentathlon look of having the running, the cross country, and then the shooting, but instead it's running and then having the bow and the archery aspect.
Yeah,
are you going to have a pop at that?
I'm not the best runner, but if I ever find a competition that's near me that I can make it to, I'd definitely be keen to give it a go. It's quite an exciting, very new format that's only recently come about. I'd definitely love to give a go, yeah.
Because I've seen a fair bit of training at university level of archery, and it's always quite calm and measured. But I'd imagine with the running aspect, there's quite a lot of adrenaline there already. How do you think that would change their dynamic, having to stop to get into the archery aspect?
Yeah, well, definitely your shot is a lot less stable. And on top of that, whenever you run, you're not allowed. I don't know if you're not allowed, because I'm not too familiar with it in the details of it. But things on here like this stabilizing rods, you don't typically see on run archers because it's too bulky to run with. So it does make your shot a lot less stable. And on top of that, your heart rate is a lot higher. So trying to keep everything still and try and get the targets down would be a lot harder. But you also typically see people actually kneel down to shoot as well, which is a very atypical style of shooting that I've only really seen in high-level competition at run archery.
So it's I suppose, any way to get the shot as stable as you can. Do you think we'll see more adoption of run archery, maybe at more regional levels, do you think?
Well, it has hit European levels already, so I'm sure it will trickle down to there being more local run archery competitions happening.
Or maybe then there might be a chance for you to have a dabble at it.
Have a go. I don't know if my heart could take it. Like, I'm not the most athletic, or I don't know if my heart could do that.
and you spoke a little bit about the sort of elite aspect of it. It's put on a podium. It's quite expensive to get into archery. Again, we've got this recurve bow behind us, right? That's what you shoot. So talk to us a little bit about the bow and your shooting style.
Yeah, so I shoot a recurve bow, which is what you typically see in the Olympics, which is what I've handily brought behind me, like Blue Peter style. This is one I prepared earlier. This is the main bow that you would get for any competition. You really see that at a very high level, but there are other styles. So there's bare bow, where you get none of the stuff on it. You just get the middle bit and the limbs, or compound, where it's a whole other thing altogether. You get to see that in the Paralympics quite a bit. They're really interesting bows. But yeah, for here you get a center bit with the riser, which is the main bit that you hold. It's where everything else connects onto. You've got limbs either side, which store all the energy of your shot. As you pull back, they will bend, and then when you fire, it will flick up and release your arrow. I've got a sight, which is not allowed to be magnified at all. It's just a tiny dot. I've got some fiber optics, so it glows a wee bit, that I'm able just to hover on the target so I can see where my arrow is going to go. And then some stabilizers that just help to stabilize my shot both up and down like this and side to side here, so that just as I release the bow will naturally follow where the arrow is going to go. Because you see a lot with bare bow and longbow archers, the bow tends to flick left or right, and these stabilizers help minimise against that. And then there's some smaller aspects just in this middle bit here that help with knowing how far back I've pulled the arrow and keeping the arrow dead centre here with the plunger.
So why recurve then? Why did you settle on that? You've shot a few different types throughout your time.
Yeah, well, there are two things that kind of played part of it. I used to shoot barebow, which was the recurve bow without any of that on it. And when I got older, I also got a bit more money, so it meant I could afford to add on some cheaper versions of what I've now got on there and just get me started more into that category. And then I do quite like recurve just because it is currently the most competitive format of the sport. The most people in the country compete in that side of things, and there's a lot more competition there and people to compete against. Because what I found, especially as a junior, is that you can end up going to local competitions and you're maybe like, it's just you and against maybe one or two other people that are in the same category as you. So having a recurve, you've got a lot more opponents to go up against, and I quite preferred that.
And is it typically that sort of skill ladder in terms of you develop on barebow and work your way up?
It's not really seen as a progression to change between barebow, recurve and compound. They're all their own styles. So you devote yourself to one or maybe multiple. But it's not really seen as a progression between them. Whenever you start archery, you would always learn barebow first because it's a lot more thinking that you have to do whenever you add a whole bunch of extra things onto the bow. So just if you add them on piece by piece, and you can give recurve a go. But if you preferred none of it and just shoot instinctively, you can do that, or switching it over to compound, which is a whole different thing entirely.
So would you say is a little bit of it's a money game as part of it? You're learning barebow, and then if you want to go a bit more and you're willing to put the money in, you can go to that sort of level.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to put money in to get the cheaper stuff. Your club would likely have a lot of it sitting about, and people will always have spares that they're willing to sell you for a lot less than you would ever have to buy new. So you don't have to spend too much money to switch over to recurve, but it is slightly more expensive than it would be to shoot barebow.
And you talk about a club and being attached to a club. Again, I suppose you'd say it's an individual sport. Is there any sort of team dynamic if you're going with a team? How does that work?
Well, on various levels, there are different ways that a team can sort of interact. Whenever you're looking at the highest level of Olympics, you can have team head-to-head formats where you have multiple people all shooting at the same target, where you all only get one arrow each, and your combined score is then compared against the other team. But then you can also have various team formats where you go as a group, you can support each other, you can cheer each other on or give each other tips during the shoot. And at the end of the competition, your overall score is combined and ranked that way, which is a lot different from what you would see in the Olympics. But you can have team formats right the way down to club level. And it is quite fun to be able to go with a big group of people that you all know who all love the sport.
We've mentioned the Olympics a few times. Mm-hmm. I suppose you watch it a lot, especially when the archery's on. Is that an ambition of yours one day?
Yes, you never know. One day it would be quite fun to get to that highest level, but it is quite a ladder to climb. But it is one that I'm definitely working towards, and I'm ever hopeful. Maybe LA 2028 or Brisbane 32. We don't know, but I'm working towards it.
Potentially, because again, it's not in the Commonwealth, is it? Actually, why do we think that is?
Well, at least for the most recent one, they've cut the Commonwealth program down to 10 sports, and they cited it was money reasons, and it is very expensive to run an archery competition, especially at that level, because you have to get like cameras and quite a lot of space for those high-end shoots, because it's 70-meter range and everything has to be safe, it is quite expensive to run. So, I mean, it's not even been a compulsory sport for a while. It's only, I think, appeared once or twice in the entire history of the Commonwealth Games.
Right. And we talk about 70-meter range. Mm-hmm. Can we try and put that into perspective for people who might not understand what that quite looks like?
Yeah, so for Olympic outdoor standard shoot for a recurve bow, you're shooting 70 metres, which is about the width of a rugby pitch, maybe a bit longer. But if you're shooting from one sideline to the other, that's about 70 metres.
Right.
So it is quite a way.
A fair distance, yeah. And again, we see more modern technology come into archery a lot of the time. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Would you say there's an aspect of modern technology taking away some aspects of archery with more traditional bows, or like how things would have been done many decades ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, the first time archery appeared in the Olympics, it was longbows being shot at like clay pigeons sitting on sticks. I can't remember what exactly they called it, but it was literally just longbows. And as the recurve bow was invented in the 50s and developed further, it became the most competitive bow that still had similar techniques to those older bows. And it's the progression of how things have been, and as recurve has become a more and more popular form of archery versus those older, more traditional types, it's just naturally become the standard one for competition. And there is an argument of traditional bows are like the way that you have to always do it, but ultimately it's what's most fun to you. And for the vast majority of people, they've found that recurve bows are the best for competition, and they're the most popular kind.
I think I was talking to someone who did modern pentathlon as part of their sort of athletic career, and I think they mentioned that even shooting part of that, or there's a development part of shooting that maybe actually losing the projectile part of it, and is turning to lasers instead, to be more sort of laser shooting. I'm not quite going to assume archery may be the case in maybe 10 years or not, but do you think that there might be a stage of augmentation to bows where it might get too much? The fun part of the Olympics this year, of course, was the shooting, the 10-meter shooting, the pistol shooting. Yes. And you see all these people coming with so many layers of sights and everything. Do you think archery will get to that level where it's a bit too much thinking, whoa, where's just the bow? You've got all this gear on.
Mm-hmm. I think for archery, it will be very slow for any kind of change to happen. Only quite recently, there was only one very big level competition that allowed electronics on the bow. And that was the JVD Open over in the Netherlands. But even then, electronics on the bow, they only really provide accelerometer data to a phone, so you can see how your bow is responding as you're shooting and stuff like that, and it can check levels and things like that. And it doesn't overly change how you're shooting. There's not a lot that you can do electronically to change your shot or make it easier. The only real thing that could potentially change is compound archery becoming more mainstream, and with that there's a lot more technology involved as you're allowed to magnification and stuff like that, and there's always bids for compound archery to make it to the Olympics, and I think it would be quite good to see more archery there, but as it stands, the current Olympic Committee count all the various formats of 70-meter recurve archery as different events. So whether it's individual, team, or mixed team, they all count that as individual things. So they say, oh, we've got 6 archery events, but every single time you're doing fundamentally the exact same thing.
And have you tried compound?
I have tried compound.
What's it like?
It feels so different from recurve, because whenever you're firing a recurve bow, whenever you're holding it at full draw, you feel all the weight of it on your fingers. But whenever you're firing a compound bow, that weight drops off whenever you pull back. So whenever you're holding it at full draw, it feels like absolutely nothing. And it feels really, really strange. And it is quite satisfying because you pull a trigger that's in your hand, you don't let go of a string.
Right.
So it is quite satisfying just to let it fly off. But whenever you go to competition, it's very high stakes, very tight tolerances, especially when you get to the higher ends of things, of like, if you miss the 10 once or twice, that could mean the difference between like first and second place. It can get very, very tight very quickly, and I just prefer there's a bit more wiggle room in recurve.
Compound is a bit more like a crossbow, vertical crossbows that you're pulling it back, pulling a trigger to let it loose.
Yeah, pretty much. It does have very, very similar to technology to modern crossbows, but they are a wee bit more, bit weaker than crossbows. Mm-hmm.
Do you ever think archery is misunderstood or misrepresented in any way? Again, because we've seen with shooting, there's often parts of it where people may think they still have that hunter connotation or sort of game hunting. Do you think there's any notion of that, or a public perception of saying archery, they're just sort of this hobbyist group of people?
Yeah, there's a lot of precedents, at least in Archery GB, to distance yourself from bow hunting. You're not allowed to wear camo at all whenever you are competing, as it sort of makes it more of a sport and less of a we've stopped shooting at animals, so we're going to shoot at targets instead kind of thing. And it is still a bit of a hot topic of whether or not bow hunting should be allowed. Over in the States, it is allowed, but you have to have very, very powerful bows to make it more humane for the animal that you're hunting. But personally, for me, I haven't really seen too much of people in public sort of saying or acting as if archers are negative in any way. They do generally find it quite of a, admittedly, like a cool sport nearly. They're like, if I've told people I do archery, they're like, "Oh, you do archery? That's not normal." And I get to tell some more people about what I do and how it works.
But do you think that's interesting? People say it; they might come across you and say, "Oh, that's not normal." Considering when we look in Europe, especially medieval Europe, it was very commonplace. Young boys were trained from an early age to do archery. What's the youth participation like now? I'm not saying we have a mandate that every boy age 6. What's it like? What's the grassroots of archery look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good initiatives that Archery GB are running, and they do it every year to really drum up sort of awareness of the sport. They run a thing in May called Start Archery, where clubs up and down the country will run have-a-go sessions where they're in a very public place. People can come and just have a go at it, and if they liked it, they can sign up to do a proper beginner's course and learn more about the sport. And especially in like youth divisions, there's a lot of really, really good structures in place for youth archers to really grow and get into the sport. There's local schools leagues. There's one back in Northern Ireland that's recently started that is going quite well. And then at more national levels, they've got junior archery series and also like the youth festival, which is quite a fun shoot where you get 5 days of shooting up at the National Archery Centre. You get to meet loads of other young archers from across the country and compete against them. So I'd say, the sort of the youth sides of things are really, really strong at the minute.
Because I think that the first sort of, the earliest memory I have of seeing archery is probably at an English Heritage or a National Trust or Cadw site in Wales, at a castle where they'll have a demonstration going on. You know what I mean? That's the sort of thing that I and probably lots of other people can relate to seeing it. And it is cool to see it at a young age when you're barely as tall as the bow is lifted off the ground and you're sort of looking up and watching this arrow flying down. But I suppose, do you think more exposure on social media, on television, broadcast would bring that to the front? It would make it a lot more popular, because we don't really see it broadcast much, do we? It's not something as a major sport that's really shown, other than say at the Olympics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not a lot of public interest there for it, and I've spoken online on forums talking about broadcast of archery, and it's sort of like a chicken and egg situation where it's not being broadcast because people aren't interested, but people aren't interested because it's never on TV. And it's always in one of those sports where whenever you're just flicking through on the Olympics and you say, "Oh, archery's on, let's see what that's like." But even then, this year, it only really appeared whenever the GB archers were shooting, and there weren't as many rounds as there hopefully could have been, but they still did really, really well. I'd feel like if they were able to broadcast more of the UK events that happened throughout the year, that would definitely bring up a lot of awareness for the sport, especially the national tour finals that happen in August or early September. They'd be really good to get on TV somewhere, I'd feel.
And what would that appeal look like? If it was broadcast, how is that going to appeal to a new generation of people getting into watching archery and then hopefully actually getting into archery?
Well, there's a lot of resources online, I'd say. So whenever you watch it online, sort of in my head, the thought process would be something along the lines of, "Oh, they look cool, I want to do that." And they'd go online and see like, "Oh, how do I start archery?" And usually if you'd Google that in the UK, you get taken to the Start Archery page on the Archery GB website, which has loads of resources on where you go, what you do, and how you go about getting into the sport, and how to find the nearest club to you, and when they're running their next beginner's course, or some places that run perpetual beginner's courses. And I'd feel that if it was more visible to more people, there'd be more people wanting to get into the sport.
So it's a sort of awareness game and getting that awareness out there. What's the representation look like? Is it mostly male dominated, or is there a mixed genders? How does that look?
Well, whenever you're getting up to Olympic levels, it was perfectly 50-50 gender-wise. which was quite good. I think across the whole Olympics it was in fact pretty much 50-50, which was really, really good to see. But whatever you, at least for the clubs that I've been working down to the local levels, it does tend to be a bit more male dominated. But that is changing, mainly thanks to characters like Katniss and Brave. There's a lot more young girls wanting to get into the sport. So it is looking a lot more 50-50 at the minute, yeah.
And you think that will improve a lot more going forward? But does it have to be tied to those kind of role model figures that we might see in fiction, or is there anything tangible that archery regional groups can do to promote that more sort of domestically?
Well, I definitely think as we're seeing more and more archers from the UK end up in high level situations, you're seeing that actually specifically for the UK, the women are a lot better than the men are in terms of where they rank. So the current world number one compound archer, Ella Gibson from the UK, and she's really, really good at going about promoting the sport to anyone. And also former world number one Penny Healy was also doing really former world number one Penny Healy was also doing really, really well for promoting the sport to loads of people, especially from back home. And yeah,
it's right. Some of them can be quite difficult to.
Yeah, that was quite a flub. Hopefully you can. Yeah,
it's okay. I think we mentioned Olympics a few times and the competitiveness. And I think there was sort of controversy over the scoring system. We see it in set points. What's your sort of opinion?
Yeah, so the set scoring system was invented to make archery more broadcastable. It's for people who have no idea what that is. It's essentially both people would shoot 3 arrows. Whoever gets the highest score gets 2 points, and if it's a draw, you get 1 each. Whoever gets to 6 points first will win the whole match. And if it goes to 5-5, you get a shoot-off where 1 arrow each, and whoever's closest to the middle will win the end, or will win the round. And it is quite a good system in terms of broadcastability because it provides that kind of that tension and that like idea of, oh, you can be down and then make a comeback and those kinds of things. It provides a lot more of a story for people to engage with. But you find with other disciplines, especially compound archery, it doesn't lend too well to it because most of the time at the higher levels, you're shooting the same exact score every single time and you're always going to be tying on set points, which means most matches for compound in a set scoring system would end up just being a shoot-off. And that's quite frustrating where you can't exactly measure an archer's ability just really by 1 arrow. So they stick to the old system of scoring, which was just you both shot 15 arrows, whoever got the highest score won the match. But that's not as interesting to watch unless you yourself are an archer, because you're just watching at least the first maybe 12 hours each is admittedly kind of a moot point, because once you get to the final 3 hours, it's a lot more tense and exciting to watch, or at least personally to me. I'm sure the compound archers are quite excited to sit there and watch all 15 arrows.
Is it the case that we see this a lot with sports, that sometimes they change the rules every now and again? Do you think this will happen to archery, especially if it's been broadcast? They might change again in the future?
The most recent change that we've had was the introduction of a mixed team event, which had to be slightly modified for the set scoring system to allow only 2 archers per team to shoot. So you have 1 man, 1 woman per team, and that was a very, very new thing for the Tokyo Olympics, and that's been quite a successful format, I found. I've shot in a couple mixed events, and it is quite fun when it's just 2 people. You feel like it's a much more intense kind of game because there's a lot more of the match relies on you. So it's quite a fun format, and it's quite hard to predict what could change next for archery. But with wherever it goes, I'd be quite excited to see how it impacts on the game entirely.
And I suppose we haven't really broached the notion of safety with archery now. Again, you brought your bow in today, and I said it's a sporting piece of sporting equipment, and in the wrong hands, it could be a weapon. Do you think there's any safety concerns, or ever any safety concerns with archery at competition level? Like, how does that look?
Well, the safety is taken very, very seriously. There is a shooting line and a waiting line. So if you are not actively shooting, you've got to stand, I think, out for an outdoor competition. The waiting line is 5 meters behind everyone else who's shooting. There is no possible way for you to go in front of that shooting line until absolutely no one is shooting, or there will be someone will call like fast, which means hold fast, which is the traditional word that you would say to make everyone stop. But that's slowly changing just for everyone to say stop, because for new people the word fast is quite confusing, and it might, for some people, it's meant that like people think, oh, I should shoot really quickly. So they've stopped saying fast, and you have to stop entirely and just wait for whoever or whatever is in front of the line to get out of the way to make sure it's safe. You've got to make sure there's appropriate backstops and that the general field of play is away from public and not having a chance of anyone to accidentally encroach on the field and potentially get impaled. So the safety of archery is taken very, very seriously indeed, yeah.
Has any of that been more recent changes as well, or has it been like that for a while?
For as long as I've ever seen it, it's always been like that. There haven't been any big changes in terms of the sport needing any kind of updates. There haven't been any incidents involving people in bows, to my knowledge, for quite a while. Probably, yeah, for a very long time, I would say.
And then you now, back to you. When you're competing, how do you get into the zone? What's that feel like, and what's that look like?
It's a lot of being calm and not trying to overthink. You find with a lot of sports, people are like getting psyched up or pumped up and getting the adrenaline running. But for archery, it's the opposite of that. You really do not want to have your heart rate high. You want to keep your breathing slow and low and everything steady. And you just got to work through your process as many times as you have to. In a typical competition, you would shoot either 60 or 72 arrows. So you want to make sure that every single one of those arrows is exactly identical. The way you've shot it, absolutely everything has to be exactly the same. And if your heart rate is changing or you're thinking too hard about something, it can throw off your arrow. And it's very much, I want to try and still my mind and not worry too much about what's going on, whether it's a local competition or if it is quite a high level for me competition. I want to make sure I'm not thinking too hard about it and just staying calm and working through my shot.
And how do you maintain sort of a level of motivation for competitions? Or you must have points of stagnation where you're not competing. How do you maintain that motivation?
That is quite difficult sometimes, I would say. Especially around this time last year, I was starting to plateau a bit. I couldn't quite break out of the scores that I was hitting. I couldn't get higher, and I knew there was plenty of room to be able to go higher. And in times of that where I was just sort of not progressing as much as I was hoping to, it was getting quite frustrating, really. But just working hard through it and getting coaches to just sort of look at what I'm doing and see what bits of my technique I can improve. It kind of broke that mold a bit, and I've started to push up again, which is quite exciting to see. But in those moments, it can be quite difficult to sort of stay motivated whenever you think, oh, it's just the same over and over again. But I've found if I ever step away from archery for a bit, like I had to back in 2020 because I had nowhere to shoot, I found when I came back to archery, it immediately felt like my happy place again. I didn't realize just how much I missed it until I went back to it again. And it feels like problems aren't caused by not being able to shoot. It's more like all my problems are solved by just getting time to just shoot, whether it's in a field or in a competition. It really does help.
Do you think that's part of your self-identity now? Do you think archery's become that part of you?
Yeah, I'd definitely say my archery is a very, very big part of me now. Without it, there will be a lot of time spent of doing absolutely nothing because I have no idea what I would replace it with. It's.
Do you think it teaches you a lot about discipline and patience? Would you say that that's something applicable?
Yeah, it definitely has helped with stillness. I also have found personally for me, archery being an outlet for mental health has been really, really good. I find, particularly feeling bouts of anxiety or depression, just that time to just shoot and cam and just repeat the process. Not necessarily in those times worrying about where the arrows are landing, just working on the process at my side of things. It can be quite a calming and relaxing time, and I find that to be quite helpful.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today and talking a bit about.
Thank you.
Well, we're talking a lot about your journey and archery as a wider sport. I think it's been very insightful, and I hope one day that you'll make it to the Olympic levels and you'll get up there with Rika, which may have a completely different landscape in a decade or so. As we said, things change in sport and the way broadcasters approach things, which ultimately influence how a sport is carried out. But thank you very much, Isaac, for joining. It's been very good. So that's it for this episode. Like I said, this podcast will be tackling fringe sports in the shadow of other mainstream sports. So join us next episode and we'll be covering another sport. Thank you.